The year is 2018, where the landscape of Major League Baseball was way different than it is today. For starters, Matt Kemp was the starting left fielder for the National League in the All-Star game. The Rockies and A's both made the postseason, and the Red Sox had one of the best seasons in recent memory, winning 108 games and the World Series. Just like any other year, we saw our fair share of really bad teams as well, but there was one team specifically that went beyond the word bad, and that team was the Baltimore Orioles. In 2018, they were horrendous. The franchise from top to bottom was an absolute disaster, and they were very clearly the laughingstock of the league. They finished the year with a record of 47-115, making them only the second team since 1963 to win less than 50 games in a season. The Royals, who had the second worst record that year, were still a full 11 games ahead of the Orioles. The gap between Baltimore and everyone else was extremely discouraging for fans, and the worst part of it all was there was very little hope for the future. In the AL East alone, there was the Red Sox, who I already mentioned were an absolute machine, followed by the 100-win Yankees, who were one of the league's best teams. Then there was the 90-win Rays, who were on the brink of becoming World Series contenders themselves as they were in the final stages of their rebuild, and the Toronto Blue Jays, who despite winning only 73 games, had one of the best farm systems in the league and potential to be dangerous in the coming years. And that left the 47-win Orioles at the bottom, who looked like they were going to be the punching bag of the division for at least the next 5 years. 5 years later, and they are one of the best teams in baseball. They're winning games with one of the youngest teams in baseball, and they managed to do all of this with one of the lowest payrolls in baseball. The Baltimore Orioles have shown us what a dream rebuild looks like, and we're going to break down how they went from this to this in such a short period of time. Before I get into it, welcome to the War Room, a channel where I discuss all things sports related. I'm going to be making MLB content like this all season long, so subscribe to the channel if you're new, and let's get straight to it. You would expect the opening day roster of a 47-win team to be filled with a bunch of no-names or vets way past their prime, but this wasn't the case with the Orioles. Heading into the season, several projections actually had Baltimore getting around 70 to 75 wins. While their roster overall wasn't very good, at the same time, it really wasn't that bad. In the lineup, they had an all-star second baseman in Jonathan Scope, a superstar in Manny Machado, who's one of the game's best infielders, 5-time all-star Adam Jones, who was near the end of his career but still productive in the outfield, plus solid role players like Tim Beckham, Trey Mancini, and Mark Trumbo. Then there was Chris Davis, who actually was that bad. So the lineup overall had a bright spot here and there, but you can't say the same for the pitching, as the best ERA from an Orioles starter was Kevin Gausman with a 4.43. They had the worst team ERA in the league at a 5.18, the worst whip at a 1.5, the most hits allowed, and the most home runs allowed. Was the pitching terrible? Yes. But were they 115 losses in a season terrible? No, not even close. From 2008 to 2018, these are the teams that ranked dead last in team ERA for that respective year. And as you can see, teams have had worse ERAs than Baltimore, but still finished the season significantly better. It's the same story with the whip, hits allowed, and home runs allowed as well. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the reason these teams had a better record despite similar pitching stats was because, unlike Baltimore, their offense was good enough to make up for some of it. But the point of me bringing this list up is to point out the fact that although these pitching numbers for Baltimore were awful, they weren't by any means historically bad or completely out of the ordinary. So it still doesn't justify the team having a historically bad record. While the below average hitting and garbage pitching certainly played a role in the team's failure, the only other explanation for this type of season might be as simple as the team just being extremely unlucky. It's possible that on top of underperforming, literally nothing was going their way the entire season. It was the type of team where they would put up 8 runs but let up 13, or put up 12 but let up 19. Then later in the same week, let up only 2 runs but only score 1. It was rare to see the offense and defense both play well in the same game. This inconsistency led to some massive losing streaks throughout the year. For comparison, the longest winning streak for them in 2018 was 4 games, and they only did it once. But here is a list of their longest losing streaks, a few of which happened multiple times. Of course, you can't mention the 2018 Orioles without talking about the trades. These are the 4 notable trades they made in July of 2018, pretty much getting rid of any talent they had in order to bolster the farm system for the future. So it's no surprise that following the July 31st deadline, the team went 14-40 to finish the year. Okay, so now we know why the team sucked. The Orioles fired manager Buck Showalter after this season and replaced him with Brandon Hyde. They also fired general manager Dan Duquette and hired Mike Elias as the man who was supposed to fix all of this. As you could expect, this rebuild didn't happen overnight, and 2019 was another rough year, but there were some moral victories. Their record improved by 7 games to 54-108. They weren't the worst team in the league that year, and they did have some young hitters that were really starting to take off. Starting pitcher John Means was Baltimore's only all-star. However, every other pitcher, including the bullpen, was so bad that the Orioles' team ERA was actually worse than it was in 2018. So this was still a problem that needed to be addressed. The biggest positive story in 2019 came during the draft. They had the #1 pick that year when they decided to take a catcher named Adley Rutschman out of Oregon State. For their first pick in the second round, they drafted teenage infielder Gunnar Henderson out of high school. Important names to remember for the future. Next is the 2020 pandemic year, which honestly feels like it came at a pretty good time for the Orioles. Since there was only 60 games instead of 162, plus an expanded playoff format, one good stretch could land you in the postseason and give your fans hope again. But if you play like shit, then fans will convince themselves the entire season doesn't count and it was a throwaway year anyway, so it's kind of a win-win. They finished at 25-35, missing the postseason, but again stacking up the moral victories. Their record was good enough to finish in 4th place in the division instead of last, as they were 1 game better than the Red Sox. 2015 first-round pick Ryan Mountcastle joined the team and got some MLB level at-bats under his belt. 2015 13th round pick Cedric Mullins was showing signs of improvement as he gained more MLB experience. Anthony Santander and Renato Nunez once again put up solid numbers in the lineup, while the pitching improved from dead last to around league average. The 2020 draft was shortened to 5 rounds, though they still walked away with guys like Heston Kjerstad, an outfielder they took 2nd overall, and infielder Jordan Westberg, who was taken at the end of the 1st round, with pitcher Tyler Wells being a notable addition from the Rule 5 draft. So very slowly things were starting to come together, but 2021 was another rough year fans would like to forget, as the team went 52-110, tied with the Diamondbacks for the worst record in baseball. Although they were once again garbage, the vibe around this team is a little bit different. They actually had a solid core in the lineup, with Austin Hayes having his first breakout season at the MLB level since Baltimore took him in the 3rd round of the 2016 draft. The 5 players a part of this core were all drafted by Baltimore prior to their 47-win season in 2018, so tons of credit needs to go to Orioles scouting and player development. Even though they were only 5 games better in 2021 than 2018, there was actually hope that if the franchise filled some of the holes they had, on top of the young core gaining more MLB experience, the team would have a legit shot at being pretty good in the future. Most of these holes were again the pitching, which somehow got even worse as the team ERA was a 5.85, again last in the league. Baltimore had the 5th overall pick in the 2021 draft, and they decided to add outfielder Colton Cowser, which brings us to 2022. Expectations were still low. Many people still considered any success for the franchise to be years away, and their official over-under for wins was set at 62.5. And just when pretty much everyone wrote them off, they started playing great. Top prospect Adley Rutschman got called up and looked like a solidified MLB star right away, finishing as the runner-up for American League Rookie of the Year. Gunnar Henderson made his MLB debut as well at the age of just 21 years old. The young core that they constructed through the draft showed they were the real deal, and we even saw that average pitching was good enough to put the team in a position to win. The bullpen was one of the best in baseball, as Jorge Lopez, who was a starting pitcher in 2021 with a 3-14 record and 6.07 ERA, was moved to the bullpen in 2022, where he was dominant and became an all-star. He was traded to the Twins at the deadline for 4 prospects, which included reliever Yennier Cano. The Orioles easily had the largest year-to-year improvement by any team, finishing 83-79, 31 games better than 2021. They still didn't make the postseason and finished 4th in a division that was stacked, but we just witnessed an improvement that takes some franchises 10 years to accomplish, while the Orioles did it in 1. No big money was dished out, and most of the players are still on their 6-year rookie contracts, making very little money, allowing the Orioles to keep their payroll near the bottom of the league while also being very young. Basically heaven for a front office. And to top it all off, the Orioles had the #1 pick in the 2022 draft since 2021 was so bad, so they got to add another top prospect in Jackson Holliday, an 18-year-old high school shortstop and the son of former MLB player Matt Holliday. In the 2022 offseason, they made some smaller signings to round out the rest of the roster. Starting pitcher Kyle Gibson for 1 year $10 million, and former All-Star infielder Adam Frazier for 1 year $8 million. And that is how we got to this point in 2023, where the Orioles are 35-20 at the time of this recording, which is near the top of the league. At just 25 in his 2nd season, Adley Rutschman is a top catcher in baseball. The former #1 prospect in all of baseball, Gunnar Henderson, is the team's starting 3rd baseman. Austin Hayes, Cedric Mullins, and Anthony Santander are holding it down once again in the outfield. Same with Ryan Mountcastle at first base. Jorge Mateo and Adam Frazier in the middle infield, and I guess shout out to the DH Ryan O'Hearn, who's the only one I didn't mention. The lineup is full of very good, young, cheap hitters that the Orioles developed during their years of suffering. Kyle Gibson and Tyler Wells are the 1-2 punch of the rotation, finally giving the pitching staff some talent. And remember Yennier Cano, who Baltimore got from trading Jorge Lopez? Yeah, his ERA right now is a .93, and he's one of the game's best bullpen arms. He's also the setup man for closer Felix Bautista, one of the league's best closers, who was picked up by Baltimore after the Marlins released him in 2015. And by the way, that Orioles farm system that used to be so bad is now ranked as number 1, with top draft picks Kjerstad, Westberg, Cowser, and Holiday ranked as the franchise's top 4 prospects, while all 4 rank as top 50 prospects in all of baseball. Regardless of how the Orioles finish this season, they've already proved that scouting, drafting, and player development can be much more effective in rebuilding a team than throwing boatloads of money at players. An organization that was pathetic just 5 years ago, with seemingly no light at the end of the tunnel, has done a complete 180, turning into a team dominating the league, with the future looking the brightest it's ever been. Only time will tell how close the squad is to a World Series, but one thing is for certain. The Baltimore Orioles from 2018 to 2023 are not only one of the great underdog stories, but the perfect example of a team that completed the dream rebuild. And that wraps up this video. Please leave a like on it if you enjoyed and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Once again, I'm going to be making MLB videos like this all season long. Thank you guys for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.